Hey guys, it's Uncle Howie, and I am here today recording my first ever full podcast. So, welcome to Uncle Howie's podcast. And my goal is to help men who have decided that they want to be a better man make good decisions, set some goals, and learn about accountability. And so, one of the probably best kept secrets in the universe is that when we set our goals, when we have something that we're determined to accomplish, one of the most helpful things that we can ask for, whether it's in prayer to God or whether it's in a community of other men, is accountability, is asking the people in our lives, the forces in our lives, the people that we respect and want to honor, to hold us accountable to the steps of each of our goals. And so, the topic today that I want to share with you has to do with the impulse to fight, the impulse to respond to negative behavior with violence or the threat of violence. And so a lot of men who grew up in homes without a solid father figure have a tendency, and it's certainly not a universal rule, but there's a tendency to want to resolve conflict with either using violence or the threat of violence. And so if you want to be a better man, these are things that you have to deal with. And kind of falls under a secular and a spiritual category. The secular thought on this would go under anger management. And just so you know, I took a 6-month anger management course, and I was in that 6-month course for 2 years. I went every Tuesday night to a group in San Diego led by a masterful facilitator named Gary. And I would say that Gary is one of the handful of men in my life who's had the biggest impact. He was extremely insightful. He was a trained psychologist, a shrink, if you will, and he met with people in groups, small groups, 8 or 9 of us, and we would have these 2-3 hour discussions every week about the things that created the problems, the things that stimulated our anger, and more importantly, how to plan and prepare, how to set goals and achieve those goals, so that whether we felt anger or not, our response would be more mature, more of an adult response. And so I want to be really clear. There's a time for violence. If you're in the military and your goal is to, protect your nation, you're going to be called upon to, produce violent results. And it's part of your job. If you volunteered, you're enlisted, you have volunteered to act on behalf of your military, your government, your command, and really more importantly, your brothers and sisters there with you in combat. And so there's a time where, in order to protect the people around you, you need to be able to produce some violent effects. Not only in a combat or a military situation. If somebody breaks into your house and threatens your wife or your children, even though you want to be a better man and you might want to live without the consequence of anger, and you have been determined to be nonviolent in your response to things, if you have to protect your child or your wife, there are times when violence is the appropriate answer. And so, I don't want to get into that, but I just want to be clear up front that I am not calling for pacifism or, total nonviolence. I think that being prepared to defend your family, being prepared to defend your fellow soldiers, and then making every effort to use diplomacy and community pressure and psychology and negotiation. I guess what I'm saying is that violence should be very limited and very much the last result. So, if you're sitting at a restaurant and somebody says something unkind to you or inappropriate to your wife, your girlfriend, if your first thought is, I'm going to smash that guy, that's pretty normal. for most men, for most young men especially. And so the thought itself, the impulse, is a pretty natural thing. And I'm not in any way trying to make anyone feel like they should be ashamed of that. Don't be ashamed of your impulse to protect people or to protect yourself. But I think that 90% of the trouble people get into with violence comes from, verbal insult, an incidental contact, someone who thinks that someone else is staring at them, mad dogging them, as they said when I was a kid. And so just, for a little background, little history for you, I grew up in a pretty rough part of Houston, and it seemed like almost every boy in my neighborhood got into fights pretty regularly with each other, with kids from other neighborhoods, with kids at school, with brothers and sisters, sometimes with grown men who had just had enough of our shenanigans. And, it almost always started with verbal nonsense, yelling and cussing and screaming at each other. And then if it elevated into violence, typically you can almost look at any two guys about to square off, and 9 out of 10 times you can predict who's going to win and who's going to lose. Occasionally, somebody would shock the other person, and you can't always predict. I had a friend who was a black belt instructor in a martial art called Sansu. It's sort of a what they would call like the assassin or the hitman's karate. They don't even spar. Like, they don't stand around spar each other, because like every move is some sort of, body part breakage or removal. It's a really, really, it's not a sport. It is a brutal, kind of mafia based martial art, from the East. And this guy was the guy who instructed black belts to go from like first degree black belt to second degree black belt. And he and I were talking one night at a party, and a friend of ours had just gotten his, I think, third degree black belt in Sansu. So pretty bad dude. And I said to him, you've been instructing black belts for 15, 20 years now. What is your best advice when it comes to fighting? And this guy who taught black belts how to be, pretty bad, pretty violent, he looked at me, and without any hesitation, he said, my best advice for every man is, if you can get out of a fight, even if it means that you run away, that is my best advice. And the reason is because you can't stop a bullet. Your black belt can't help you if somebody hits you from behind with a crowbar, or if 10 people jump on you, or if you get in trouble with someone who pulls out a pistol. All of your boxing and jiu-jitsu and karate is not going to help you. I don't care how bad you are. You can't stop a bullet. So what I want to talk about today is, some experiences that I've had that really led me to setting my own commitment to responding to this type of stimulus with a nonviolent reaction. And hopefully this will encourage some of you. I grew up in a rough neighborhood, and I had an older brother who was pretty rough around the edges, and a lot of his friends were actually older than him. And so up until a certain age, I may have been in 200 different physical altercations. From the age of 5 to say the age of 12, I had been in 200 variations of fights. Some hard sparring, some wrestling, and some just knockdown, drag out fisticuffs. And I had literally never won a fight. And I didn't understand why, because I wasn't afraid to fight, and I wasn't really horrible at fighting, but I never won a fight. I was on the bottom of the pile every time. We would go out with these same kids in the same neighborhood, and we would play football, and I would do really well, So there's a different level of skill and violence, when you're blocking a guy to keep your quarterback safe, or when you're chasing after the guy and you hit him before he throws the ball and throw him on the ground. And, so, there were times in physical contests where I did pretty good for myself for a 10, 11-year-old kid. But anytime it, turned to squaring off, over some insult or over some, your mama joke, whatever it was that provoked us, I just couldn't win a fight. and it blew my mind. Well, okay, so what I want to talk to you about is my first fight, my worst fight, and my last fight. So my first fight was I was 12 years old. I had already been beaten up 200 times, literally. And this kid in the cafeteria before school in the morning, this is in Houston, rough neighborhood, said something terrible about my mother. And there may have been some truth to this accusation, but it was loud and it was embarrassing. And I thought, well, I guess I'm just going to get beat up again. So I just went for it. And when I grabbed this guy and I threw him down on the ground and I kind of straddled over him, and this kid was athletic and had won a lot of fights and was kind of like the toughest kid in the school. His name was Chris. And I'm sure he's a great guy now. I mean, I wish I could run into this guy, Chris. But anyway, I threw him on the ground and I just trashed him. I mean, I beat him silly. And the principal came in and pulled me off, and we both got paddled and sent home. And when I was walking home, I realized I had never fought anyone my own age. And my brother and my stepdad, both said, so are you going to be a bully now? And I was like, no, I hate bullies. I will never be a bully. But I thought so much about the fact that my entire life, I couldn't figure out why I couldn't win a fight. And I realized that every person I had ever fought was either my older brother, 3 years older, his age, or older. And a couple times my stepdad whooped me pretty hard. He's a grown man. And even though I was a big 12-year-old, there's just no accounting for a 3, 4, 5, 15-year difference in age. And so the first time I ever fought someone my own age, I trounced them. And anyway, we didn't become best friends. It's not the typical story, but we never fought again. And honestly, I didn't go looking for fights, but I did, it encouraged me to kind of not back down. And at one point when I was 16, I moved to schools, actually from one state to another. So I wound up in Connecticut from Houston. And at this new school, in the town, Danbury, Connecticut, I pulled up to a gas station and I got into a verbal altercation with this guy. And he was kind of big and muscular, and I was kind of fat and chubby. But, here I am, this determined, confident redneck kid from Texas. And anyway, I just, I didn't back down, and he did. He backed down. And I thought, it was really an interesting lesson, here's a guy from another part of the world, and he talked like he wanted to fight, but when push came to shove, he didn't, and he backed down. And I thought, it's a new lesson for me. And so, years went on, and, I got into several more fights. I wound up, finally finishing high school, and I went in the Army, and I joined the boxing team in the Army, and it was great, and I was getting better and better at fighting. I started taking martial arts pretty seriously, and, my confidence went through the roof. And I was stationed in Germany for a while in the Army. I think I was either 19 or barely 20. And there was a day when I was, having a verbal altercation, kind of angry at this guy. And he brought some friends with him. And I looked around the room. We were inside of a building, and it was just me and a big group of other guys. And so this is my worst fight story. So first real fight with someone my own age, I won. Second, my worst fight, I'd had several others since then. Hadn't lost many after the age of 12. And then I decided that I was going to take on this whole group of guys. And I thought, who's going to go first? And sure enough, they started coming at me one or two at a time. And I did pretty well for a while, but I got exhausted. And the last handful of guys who weren't on the floor, they beat the crap out of me. I mean, I got kicked in the ribs, kicked in the face, punched on the ground. It was, it was pretty brutal. And I probably should have gone to the hospital, but in the Army, when you go to the hospital, you have to explain why you're there. And I did not want to explain to anyone in my command, why I was all lacerated and bleeding and bruised up. But I mean, I took a beating from a handful of guys. And, just so you know, I actually beat up several of them before the last handful of them got me on the ground and taught me a hard lesson. And so my ego had gotten into the decision-making process. And I have to tell you, I I was pretty embarrassed. Not that I lost to a big group of guys, that happens, but that I was so full of ego that I thought I might actually win. I mean, just thinking about it now, it just seems ridiculous. If I could go back and tell myself, something at the age of 20, it would be, hey, don't fight 12 guys at a time, you idiot. And so it was a hard lesson, and it made me look deep in myself, but I still couldn't give it up at the time. And then flash forward years later, I'm married, I have children, I have a responsibility. I was actually working at a church. I was working at a church, and I was at a public place, and this guy did something terrible to me, and I was in my 30s, and he touched me, trying to be funny, and it wasn't funny. And I stood up and I hit this kid one time, and he was a big guy, military guy, and he landed on his back, and his head was up against the wall, and he looked up at me, and he's like, "You didn't think that was funny?" I was like, "No." And all of a sudden, I was just kind of flooded with shame. And here I am, a man with real responsibility, family, some kids, a wife at the time, and I felt embarrassed that I had struck this guy over something. He wasn't threatening me. He was trying to be funny, and I should have just said something. I should have talked to him and said, "Hey, man, you're young. Don't do crap like that. Don't do it again. Don't do it again." But instead, I whacked him, knocked him off his bar stool. He winds up on his back. He could have cracked his head open, but he didn't. And so I bought this guy a cold beverage, and we talked for about an hour. And we didn't become friends either. I never saw that guy again. No, that's not true. I saw him a couple times, but we weren't friends. And I just remember going home that night and thinking to myself, you know what? Unless someone else's life is on the line, I'm never gonna fight again. And if you remember from our last video, I said, a young man learns how to take care of himself, but a fully grown man, a fully developed man, has to take care of other people. And so if you're 30 and you're living in your mom's basement, you're playing video games, I don't care if you have a job or not, you're paying some rent at your parents' house, you're probably not really taking care of yourself. You're probably not taking care of other people. And I'm not criticizing you. I want to encourage you to make decisions and set goals, and just to grow out of that and to get some accountability, as we said before. But no matter what age you are, take this hard-learned lesson and wisdom. Unless you are defending someone else, don't resort to violence. Don't fight. If you want to be a better man, quit fighting. Quit fist fighting and challenging people and threatening people. I know people who every time they get angry, they threaten to kill someone or shoot someone or chase someone down or be their worst nightmare. And I always say, don't make threats. Either do it or don't do it. Don't talk about it like that. Just be who you are. But if you want to be better tomorrow than you are today, make the decision right now that you're not going to be the person who responds with violence. So, my first fight, with someone that was fair, I won. My worst fight, I lost really bad. In my last fight, I felt an incredible amount of shame for being, a man with responsibility and a family, in my 30s. And so I went to this anger management course, and it was supposed to take 6 months, and it was voluntary. No judge made me go, and I was paying for it. And interestingly, my church, where I was working at the time, they offered to pay for it. They really liked me, and they wanted me to succeed. And they offered to pay for my anger management course. And I said, no, this needs to come out of my pocket. I want to take ownership of this. I want to be a better man, and I want to be responsible. I want to change. And so I thought, me paying for it was really important. And so after about 6 months, not a lot had changed. I definitely knew that I was less crazy than I thought I was. And I understood other people's temptation to let anger, rule them. And I started to understand that it boiled down to basically a lack of self-control on my part. And so I had lived up to my commitment to not respond with violence, but internally there was this volcano just spewing emotions, and it just seemed to never stop, never stop. And after about a year in anger management, we did this exercise. Gary Cundiff, this amazing man, this facilitator for this anger management group, he led us through an exercise where we did a visualization of some of the worst events in our life. And what I noticed in my visualization was that I really wasn't angry at my brother for being a bully and really being brutal when we were growing up. And by the way, we're close friends now. I love my brother, but he would tell you that he was rough on me. And my stepdad, brutal. If I told you stories, you'd probably shed a tear. I mean, brutal, really, really bad. And I wasn't mad at either one of them. It was like, my older brother was just a kid for most of the story, and my stepdad was obviously a sick man. And what I noticed was that there were these other three men in the story, and they seemed to always be around. It was two uncles and my grandfather. They were all military, war veterans. They were all, heroes to some degree. But for some reason, they would never step forward and protect me. Even when I was little, when I was 8, 9, 10 years old, they just wouldn't step in. They would just watch me suffer brutality. And what I realized was that what had really fueled my anger all those years was the cowardice, the inability or unwillingness of these other men to step in and even say something. Just say, hey, Alan, my stepdad, Alan, do you think you should just be beating the crap out of that kid all the time? You think the blood on your carpet is a good idea? Maybe you should back off. They never said a word. They would play cards at our kitchen table. They would come over for dinner and barbecues. And when this maniac would lose his mind and do some pretty illegal things to the children in his life, but especially me for some reason, I think it was probably because I had a smart mouth. They wouldn't stand up to him. And so during about the first year of anger management, I figured this out. It took me a year to figure out why I was so angry. And then, my grandfather had passed away, but I called both my uncles, who I still love. I love my uncles. When I called them and said, hey, how come you guys never stuck up for me? I mean, how do you defend that? And they were both like, man, your stepdad scared the crap out of me. I was scared to defend you because I was afraid of what he might do to me. And so, it took me about another year after discovering why I was so angry to put kind of a lid on top of the volcano. Now, the volcano is still there. I will tell you this. The rage and the indignity and the anger is very much in me, and it still gets provoked. There are times where in my thoughts, I am thinking about a violent response to somebody's words or misdeed or lack of courtesy. A lot of times, like if I'm doing business, like say I'm signing a lease with a new landlord, I will hint that I'm definitely not the guy that you want to screw over. So I'll be like, hey, if you're not going to be very, very honest with me, don't sign this lease with me. And I don't threaten people, but I do kind of warn people that there's still a wild animal inside of me. But I'm getting older, and the truth is, it has been 20 years since I've actually committed a violent act. But almost every day, I think about violence. I mean, that volcano is alive and well. And what I'm grateful for is that in the anger management, what I learned was how to put a lid on it so that when I am provoked, I'm not surprised anymore. The explosions don't happen the way they used to pretty frequently. And so, I look in the mirror. I'm not the guy that thinks of myself as a good man. I want to help people. I really do love people. My biggest and most important goal for everyone I love is that we would all get to spend eternity together, and I would love to discuss that in great detail with you. But the truth is, I'm not a good man. I'm just a man that wants to be better. I want to be better tomorrow than I am today. And I've learned some things about that. And so getting a grip on your anger and the impulse to use violence, and really just exercising some self-control is there's a reason that this is my first podcast. I want to encourage you to learn other ways to solve problems. And so if that's something you need help with, I'm not trying to sell you a book or a class. I'm not going to start an anger management group, but you can find one. And, maybe you need one-on-one counseling. Maybe you need to find a group with a guy like Gary. Or maybe you need to get on your knees and just pray and ask God to chase away those demons. But whatever it is that you need to succeed, set a goal, a big goal. Write it down. I will become a non-violent man, unless someone's trying to hurt my family. And I will take whatever steps are necessary, and I will go on a path of discovery, not within myself. Look, if we had the answers within ourselves, we wouldn't need each other. The answer is with someone else. Gary came into my life through a set of, what I would consider miracles. And right when I needed someone like Gary, God gave me a relationship with this guy who was able to see through my excuses, my baloney, and deal with me, for who I am, and help me make decisions that would have a positive impact on the people around me, the people that mean the most, and the people that I love. And so, hey, if you're watching this and I have ever hurt you in any way, I am so sorry. Please forgive me. And if you're someone, if my old stepdad is still alive and he gets a hold of this video and he feels shame, look, I totally forgive you. I don't want to be friends, but I forgive you. I don't have any grudge. I'll see you on Judgment Day. And I hope that on Judgment Day, you and everyone else who's ever been my friend or enemy would have the same sense of security of being adopted. I've been in a foster home. I've had several stepdads, but nothing changed my life like being adopted by God. Google that. Google, would God adopt me? And just, let me know what you discover. And let me know if you think this is helpful. Do me a favor, hit the like button on this video and subscribe if you're interested in hearing more about this. And if you know a young man who kind of grew up without the advantage of a really solid man in his household, please pass this to him. Send him this video and say, give Uncle Howie half an hour and see if it does encourage you to make some good decisions. All right, God bless.